Even though my research has shown there were other victims between the people who tortured me and the world at large um, than just me. UW Dialectical has mongered the conviction that I should continue to regard it as inconsequential and pertaining to just me. Now, I'm 61 years old and I'm deaf. I'm not as well read as I could be, and due to head injuries, I'm not as well spoken as I could be. In fact, I spent about 12 years staring into space in a kind of shock, doing my research as best I was able to motivate myself to do. And while my research is very interesting, I was banned from going to school for a very long time. Well, when I finally got permission to go back to school, I rose very quickly to Phi Theta Kappa status, which isn't, a big deal, but it was Community College Honor Society. And this was regarded grudgingly by UW Dialectical, who promptly moved to make me feel very unwelcome and in danger if I continued. So the belligerents that attacked me blindside as a child and left me disoriented through almost the entire period of my teens, um, which was very hard to recover from. I mean, we're talking about slaughtering head blows on a child from fully grown armed adults. The child only weighed 98 pounds, and they knocked me unconscious with poor man's ether and used nerve agents on me. And Seattle doesn't comprehend any of that. It's their blinders are absolutely fixated. No, the psychological capacities are taxed by such an event system, particularly because I'm the white. So I try to avoid going into this flim flam. It's hard to because they're constantly prodding me. And what I wish I was more eloquent about is the way the stages of belief and disbelief that I went through when it came to the Jewish community. Now, I danced the hora at the Pittsburgh Fuzz Festival in front of thousands of people when I was about 6 years old. We were taught and practiced it for a long time. So I knew the Hava Nagila song and so on, and I was identified by the Jewish community. And I knew from my father what had happened in the concentration camps, and I knew from being in a Holocaust survivor community where I did occasionally see the tattoos and knew the limitations of the world around me that Adolf Hitler was a ruinous entity who has set in motion what may eventually lead to the extinction of the people of the earth. It was one of the things that made me very strongly sympathetic to Russia because I know that what they went through in the bulk of the fighting. This doesn't mean I was stupid about dictatorships or the oppression of the masses or the double identity of a society that has its fair share of oligarchs raking in the cash and manipulating events from behind the scenes. Now, it certainly doesn't mean I approve of the murder of Anna Politkovskaya or anything like that. So, what did I do? I read a lot of books. I read Bruno Bettelheim. I didn't read Viktor Frankl that much, but I read Eli Wiesel. I read Kazetnik. I read cover to cover books by Michael Burley, the new history of the Third Reich that he wrote. I couldn't put it down. I read The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich until I started to feel like it was morbid fascination. I don't like Adolf Hitler. Anything that excuses what they did. And I saw the concentration camp films. I had a hard time with the Diary of Anne Frank because I knew so many Jewish people. It was next to impossible for me not to empathize to the point where it closed the door in my psyche. I couldn't handle it. But I think that the comments I made when the synagogue was attacked in Pittsburgh near my home, to the effect that I disagreed with the judge there named Wecht, David Wecht, I believe is his name, that children should be taught all this. I think children were taught too soon. It led to very manipulative attitudes towards me, deceitful, cruel attitudes towards me, as what they would call a nice blonde boy. I passed it off, but um, my feelings about Israel resembled Martha Gellhorn. She was often criticized as saying too dismissively things to the effect that she supported Israel no matter what they did because of what they went through, dismissive of the Arab world. And one of the reasons I say that is because I came to admire Muslim society, Islamic sensibilities. I consider tasteful and profound. And I don't believe that academics is uh, threatened by the engagement of Muslim thinkers. And at Temple University, I saw some shady people from all sides of the aisle. And I've always been a little bit careful when it came to black Muslims because they would arise from prisons and strung out people who were indoctrinated with their various reasons for hating. I had somebody come up to me on a bus and stare at me and tell me I was everything in the world that he hated. I was like, you know, what can I say? I mean, I've never done anything to this person. So it was easy to set me up and use me and talk about me behind my back and characterize me. And of course, I never knew any of that was going on because I was deaf. In fact, the girl who finally taught me sign language, which made it possible for me to go back to school Korean orphan, challenged me to try to find some other peers because she could see that people were talking down to me because I was deaf. And they'll never admit that that's why. They'll never admit that I had a neurotrauma that was inflicted experimentally by Israelis. I didn't know that. Certainly, it would have made a great deal of difference in my uh, tolerance of how I was being abused psychologically by the Jewish community, which I accepted and rationalized and free speech away. If I had known that they were behind the hiring of the gang who kidnapped and tortured me, I would have been much, much, much more direct with the police department about my concerns about the Israeli community in the city of Pittsburgh, which is why it was a sort of um, windfall for the people who had tortured me that somebody would attack a synagogue because they attributed it to um, the Svengaliism of the Swami Nostra, which is a hybrid gang online that has used my poetry for various things. UW Dialectical doesn't see me as a person, they see me as an object bought whose poetry can be used for, cyber mayhem, and they variously have done terrible things. I'll put it that way. But I'm a law-abiding person. I mean, the legal system either works or it doesn't work, but they still have, as Clint Eastwood says in Dirty Harry, I've never seen a system that worked any better. And it certainly isn't one that has the same principles where you base it on evidence, truth, and fair play. I mean, if you find something that works better than that, be sure to let me know. Now you might have somebody who's into deep semiotics who says, well, he was Riley referring his preference for fascism, and you can put a question mark after that when it comes to me because I've had problems with Hollywood, and I think some of these buzzards should be prosecuted. But basically, when he says that, he does speak for me. I mean, it doesn't, you know, um, fall overboard that just because we have disagreements about various things, he's not perfectly right when he says that an evidentiary system where there's cross examination of witnesses and fair play and judgment of a mature, competent magistrate or a jury of peers is the best possible system. Because it is. You can't really do better than that. It would be nice if you could, but you really can't. So I would never do any of the things that get attributed to me. And I've tried really hard to call attention to the framework of this. Now I know that this thing is called hybrid zania. If you go into my past records, you'll see I was calling it a Swami Nosra. But these are things that emerge. What I'm saying is if I had known that they were behind torturing me, I would have been more careful and direct about it. But I didn't know it. I knew that they were running me down and watching me and caging me and plying me with marijuana and being degrading and defiling of me and talking really crude things about my sister, calling her a shiska. But they were also people who I knew and grew up with. So it was part of the cultural ethics. I wasn't afraid of them. I never realized that they were doing what they were doing. I thought that they were cared about me. That's what I thought. So I cared about them. And of course, even if I didn't grow up in the Jewish Holocaust survivor community and read Eli Wiesel, Bettelheim, Kazatnik, Michael Burley, William Shirer, and a host of other things that maybe I have let fall into forgetfulness over the years, I would have seen that what happened was an attack on the human soul. And of course, when your heart goes out to your fellow man, there are forces in the world that notice that and try to use you and chastise you. The Marquis de Sade had a famous, I think Bastille Day is what they call the liberation of the prison in France, but he was held there. He has a book called Good Conduct Well Chastised. And one of the things that first started to really alarm me about the intellectual circuit and the community I lived in was when they were really very licky chops with laughter about that Marquis de Sade sadism. I didn't really like that. I started to realize that something was wrong in the intellectual climate of the University of Pittsburgh. And that's about when I started to talk at Pitt News in my Ritual Dissent editorial columns, which very significantly a partner of the person who was doing that was from Pitt News prior and tried to get me stopped. They didn't want my name in print around the University of Pittsburgh. And the reason for that is that they were constructing a persona, and this wasn't just the Jewish community. The NAACP, Greg Carl's Catholic division were constructing a persona. And everybody knows Jimmy Crary's storyline that was going on, that was coming from British prog rockers and Yoko Ono and the museum scene who were being sneaky about valuable books, stealing them, and so on. They had used me, and they had this everybody knows Jimmy Crary thing going, and they didn't want anybody to know Jimmy Crary. They didn't want anybody. I left ultimately when they started calling me James. James. I mean, there was like a culturalism. Everybody knows Jimmy Crary. And they didn't want anybody to know me. They didn't want to hear my inner yearnings. They didn't want to hear my poetry. They didn't. Well, I should be fair. There were some people who liked the idea of me just being a poet. I should be fair. I was given many golden opportunities, which I did my level best to make good on by the Pennsylvania higher educational system when it came to poetry. Sam Hazo, I got to know personally, and he never liked me very much, but Peter Balakian taught me at Bucknell's Pennsylvania Governor's School for the Arts. I tolerated John Schulman, even though I started to get scared that he was a criminal, and eventually reported my suspicions to the post office. And he was a criminal, it turned out. He went to the governor's school, so he was a govy, as we called each other. The point is that it was rare, but it's selective. Poetry is where you're allowed to be who you are. And what happened eventually was that people sort of noticed that although I was suffering from a blitz of ideas that I couldn't really sort out, like Granger Morgan invited me to the International Peace and Securities conferences that he held, which were very informative. I learned something from it. I appreciate that. And Bruce Bischoff called my mind disaggregated. There was a community of people around who wondered, what are we going to do with this guy? He was, the child of senior faculty, and when he talks all these interesting things. I had a student who I had several years on come and talk to me about architecture. I was just plying him with the excitement of ecological potentials and that I had learned about in Buckminster Fuller. And this isn't, John Seitz, this was somebody else. And he looked at me when I was finished. He said, "You make me feel so old. You're so enthusiastic." I don't mean to say that couldn't outdo me when it came to everything that was technical. He's probably 1,000 times more valuable than me on the open market. I'm not trying to brag in that way. What I'm trying to do is illustrate my enthusiasm. I was deaf and estranged. So what they had in mind doing was sort of everybody knows Jimmy Curry and he's out to get some. So they started setting up what Greg Carl called uh, successive degradations of the X motive. Um, Justin Vicari was sort of leering about it with innuendos when we covered Klaus Osman's 2-day, 8-hour film about the Holocaust called Shoah, an assembly line of death, he called it. But they were doing this because abortion was their weapon. Queerball was never going to be allowed to have a child. We were going to drive him crazy with innuendo while we knock him off in this assembly line of death. And they used me for this picturesque purpose in a semester of sex operation on Mount Desert Island that a chain gang wired up from the Green Party. And it was very difficult to decipher, like, how is it that Joseph Goebbels is being extolled by the ringleader when he supposedly represents the JDL in the black man? Well, to understand that, you need the mind of Kurt Vonnegut. You need to read Mother Night by Kurt Vonnegut because there's a hypno allegory system. Because what makes it JDL is that um, Jimmy Curry was being lascivious with a lascivious Jewish girl who left him unrequited. So that's the JDL. What makes it the Goebbels representative of the NAACP and the black man is that he's promising the black man dibs on the Japanese status symbol of the script. So Joseph Goebbels is the leader of the JDL representing the black man. It's all this sort of Mother Night stuff. And it's literal. City of Pittsburgh social anthropology and Harvard social anthropology. And they have it all gizmo cracked to Robert Fripp's Svengali guitar. They call it the Gurdjieff clock because everybody knows that when someone is under spy cam through PEEP, that you do like this. And that's what makes you religiously a higher authority. Is that you PEEP, you see how it PEEP, PEEP, and they stick Satan in the butt. And Satan jumps up, oh my God, I've been stuck in the butt. And this is what they call, I think there's a word for it, parochialism. And the Ouspensky Society played this shrewd voodoo machine operation with I am the walrus techniques. I am he as you are, he as you are, me. And so, Joseph Goebbels is John Lennon, is the NAACP, is the JDL. And the only person who can work it out is a genetic paranoid schizophrenic. And the reason we can prove that it's genetic is that there's a nerve agent scar. See how clever Seattle is? Seattle's very, very clever. They put on their special beanies with the twirly birds on, you know, and they say, see, so he doesn't belong in school. He belongs in a mental institution. And that's why I was staring at the space because, to be quite frank, I was concerned about the wars in the Middle East. I couldn't believe those were going on. What I was getting that feedback about them. When I got out, finally got into school again, I wrote my paper, The Future of Walls, Immigrants and Refugees paper, which I still learn from. It's well researched. It was an honors contract for the Community College of Allegheny County. But to understand the puerile mind of Penis Gabriel really does take work. I mean, these are the rock stars who swore that they were going to lead us to a utopia with their fossil fuel rock and roll. You know, getting ingenuity together. I mean, Roger Waters is like peep and snivel, peep and snivel, peep and snivel, peep and snivel. Nobody peeps and snivels like Pink Floyd. So don't you ever dare say that anybody peeps and snivels better than Pink Floyd because nobody peeps and snivels like Pink Floyd.